Okay, welcome back, everybody. And we are resuming our meeting, and we are on 7.1 board chair report. So I'll just highlight a couple of things.
Just bringing it up now.
Sure, thank you. So we did receive a response from the Maskawatchie's Educational School Council. So they were just happy to hear from us, and they felt very positive about our letter. So now that is on their board meeting, and we'll wait to hear from them after they've talked about it at their board. So April 15th, we had our Catholic school chairs, superintendents, and archbishop meeting. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. We did have a presentation from St. Joseph's College, and it was excellent. And I just wanted to ask you, Charlie, so do we kind of highlight, like when we are, I guess what came up in that discussion was St. Joe's is used as a, well, it's not used as a hiring point, but it helps with hiring. So I'm just wondering, do we have those kind of comments or encouraging words in our, when we're looking to hire people? Is that if they do attend Newman or St. Joe's?
I think there's two things that were mentioned in respect to that, Madam Chair. The first was that do we require some divisions like Edmonton Catholic require all applicants to have 2 of the St. Joe's courses to be able to apply. We do not put that barrier in. It would be a big hindrance to our hiring processes. And then the second piece is, do we encourage our staff to take part in their certificate programs? And the answer is no. We funnel the people at STAR into Newman and into Excel.
Yeah.
So that's Edmonton Catholic's not a part of Excel. They go to St. Joe's for their partnership.
Yeah.
We go to Newman.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers those 2 questions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's what I thought. I was just wondering if we used, or had them listed as, helps them in their application process. The next item on that agenda was Catholic Education Week. And there was a bit of a presentation on what boards could do. And the one item that came up was, could you get a letter from your municipality on support for Catholic education for Catholic Education Week? And everybody was quite quiet about whether they could or not. So, but this actually has come up at ASBA as well, asking for letters of support from municipalities closer to the elections, because, just bringing awareness of school boards and trusteeship. So I just thought I'd ask if, I'm not sure, Charlie, did you understand that we were going to get a template on that, on how to ask for that letter, or?
No, there was no direction on that. In fact, it was just, I think you made the comment that would just leave it to individual trustees and boards to decide if they wanted to pursue that or not. There is not anything coming as a template,
yeah, okay.
my understanding.
Okay. So just wondering, I don't know, I just thought I'd put it out to trustees if.
Trustee Stevich, do you have your hands up?
Sorry, I can't see everybody.
No, Danny, do you have your hands up? No, your hand is up there, I see. Okay, so Madam Chair.
Like, I thought of your community, Henry, that if the
yeah, Madam Chair, I'm really scratching my head about these acts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really to just that my opinion, very much it's a divisive act to ask in a community like that. Simply because we do know municipalities are in support of education. They are in support of educating their communities, and especially primary education, which is the basics to hold back their communities. So when we're going to ask, do you support this, don't you? No. Other municipalities have worked well, earmark school lands, and it is when government say, hey, we have a bill here, whoever is ready for it, they give to. So yeah, I really don't want to be, because yeah, it's just not a good ask. That's just my take on it. Yes,
Yeah.
it's in support of
Yeah, that's
education.
what, yeah. I think a lot of people were just kind of unsure about it, like what that would look like. And it would have to be a local kind of consideration. So, and your community was the only one that I kind of thought of might be open to doing it, because you have a pretty good relationship with the mayor there, correct?
Yes, but our community is ever ready when we have an ask. I'm sure they will step up and do what is needed, right?
Right. Okay, so we won't worry about that.
No.
We have a counselor I know would be,
Yeah. She could tweet about us.
because Reuben Connick was a trustee before Talia. And they're both on the board right now, but I do not think the mayor would be in agreement.
Yeah. Well, individual counselors could definitely, use their social media to help with that promotion.
Yeah, she does definitely.
Yeah. Then the other,
Michelle, before you move on then, Catholic Education Week, apart from that, what did ACST brought up something concrete over there?
well, actually, Caitlin can probably comment on that, because the communicators had a
information was going
meeting,
to be-
and there wasn't a whole lot, very similar to last year. So promotion of Catholic Education Week, a letter from the bishops, some videos. There'll be some prayer time throughout the day that people can pop in and view and prayer with the bishops. There is a letter that will go out to parishes.
Okay.
And wear blue on the Thursday. So
Reason why I
just an
asked
awareness
the
of
last time. Yeah, reason why I asked the last time, Eugenia was just in the process of confirming what needs to be done and was going to communicate to the managers, communication managers and directors. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. And then the next item we already discussed, right? Donna's going to attend the notice of meeting ACSTA directors, chairs, and superintendents.
Yeah.
I noticed Charlie had his hand up, Michelle.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I couldn't see. Charlie, go ahead.
Thanks, Donna. Henry, I was just going to mention on our end of things, there seems to be a disconnect between ACST and Grace on what should happen on Catholic Education Week. So I got the sense that maybe that those two partners should talk before the communicators meeting to try to get a unified approach. That's all I was going to add. Thank
Okay,
you.
I will follow up, and I believe I did brought that up at our last directors meeting in March, that the sooner they communicate and everything gets out, the better, right? And like you said, I'll follow up. Thank you.
Okay, and sorry, just going back to the chair, superintendent, archbishop meeting, I was just going to mention that we did have a presentation. And again, this Archbishop Smith has really been, trying to foster this, amongst the different Catholic organizations, is the mission, being going back to the mission and being focused on the mission of the church. So we had a quick presentation on missionary culture, being united, being courageous, being grateful, being co-responsible, and being trusting. So we went into breakout rooms and we had a really good discussion. And I think this is going to come forward in another way from the Archbishop, all that feedback on how we will, put our focus in Catholic education as well, as, has been done with Covenant Health and Catholic Social Services. So really just bringing all our organizations to that focus of being a missionary culture. So anyhow, I find it wonderful. I absolutely do. I think it really brings focus to everybody, and the one focus and the one thing that I've always said is that Catholic schools are an extension of the church and contribute to the mission of the church. So I think that gives us great focus and will serve us well.
Yeah. So Michelle, if I may add, that was the mission fidelity discussion with the first, remember the first Archbishop's dinner? That is the hallmark of it, to unite all of these, because when you talk about hospitals and everything that Catholic missionaries have put across, and then you talk about the schools, right? You talk about a lot of the mission work that is being done from Catholic Social Services, right, into all other agencies that are extended from that. Again, that's a mission fidelity project. So definitely, I'm sure once this pandemic is subsiding, will become the focus, because a lot of the ordinary Joe on the street doesn't know what Catholic missionaries have contributed to this province. So that's why the rhetoric is always, oh, what did you do? What did you know? But a lot of all of this is happening, but people don't know. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions about my report? No?
Michelle, I think just a quick update if I could, or Charlie is going to do that. About sister board meetings.
They're on the agenda later on.
Oh, later. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, did I see that?
No worries. Thank you.
Okay. I thought I missed that somewhere.
Okay, 7.2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to touch on about 4 items, and then the 5th one's on the agenda later on regarding curriculum. But the first bullet in the faith leadership that I do want to just kind of give the board a heads up on is you may know or not know that the executive role on the CCSSA, it's a 4-year term. And you kind of work through the different positions: secretary, treasurer, vice president, president, past president. So I'm the vice president this year, and what I will say is I'll be moving into the presidency here before year's end, because Rhonda Nixon, who's current president, is moving on to BC. So I'm just letting you know that may require a few more meetings and work outside of the division. But that I'll be assuming that role of president a little sooner than next year.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Well, remember what we heard, being forged in fire.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have Father Lacombe as a standing item on the agenda, but Ed and I, in discussions, we would like to bring you up to speed when things come up. So in number 7, I'll just let you know that the acceleration plan is moving right along at Father Lacombe, and the school is set to open sooner than what we had thought, which is a great thing. And for those of you, especially Donna, will know that they're already bulldozing the old school. And the other part I'll mention about that is at the end of this month, and I had cleared this with Michelle, is we're going to move the school online for 2 days. And that's the 28th and 29th of April. We're doing that so that the old gym can be demolished without any risk or safety issues. So that site is moving right along, and it'll look different real soon, especially once that gym comes down. So just letting you know that things are moving along quite quickly at Father Lacombe.
Um,
There is,
Go ahead, Trustee Tugwood.
I was just going to add in, I was on school council meeting last night with Father Lacombe, and they're so excited about how fast things are moving, and that bulldozer, and the kids were thrilled to see it eating, I guess you could say. But the big issue was the trees in front, but I mean, that got solved, okay? And this is a kind of, maybe it's like almost good news, but Home Hardware here in town, the owner of it has come forward and said he would take that wood and make benches for the school out of the wood from those trees. So that made everyone quite happy. I just wanted
Very
to.
nice.
excellent. Thanks, Trustee Tugwood. So there are three things that are taking kind of some real precedence in the division, more than what we might have in a normal year. The first is we're still dealing with the incident at Christ the King. So we're working with Kevin Cameron on that. And what I will let you know is myself, Sean, and Ed, we interviewed pretty much every staff member last Friday. And I know Sean was just wrapping up with one today, I believe. And we're gathering kind of some of their feedback on key parts of that whole event, from the day of to the supports provided to staff and students, and how do we move forward. That will form the basis of a half-day meeting, again with Kevin Cameron and senior admin on the morning of the 30th. So work continues on in that recovery. So I just want to let you know that there is a process that's continuing to support the staff and students at that school, regarding the incident. COVID is the other kind of issue that is a little bit all consuming, and you're seeing lots of it on the news lately. And there's talk, as you know, tomorrow Edmonton, or you may not know, Edmonton Public, Edmonton Catholic are moving online for 2 weeks for their 7 to 12 students. And I know that there was some emails circulated amongst trustees here recently regarding, how does that get determined? There is a criteria that the government wants us to follow. It really does depend on the amount of cases, the ability to get subs, and just kind of the operations of the school. What I will let you know is that there has been a spike, a huge spike. I make you aware of cases as they come along. But since April 9th, okay, until yesterday, so in 11 days, we had 14 cases, okay, in the division. 7 schools had cases. And what that means, whenever we have a case, we've got to send staff and students home. And they have, because they're close contacts, and that's the legal requirement. What I will let you know is in that 11 days, in those 14 cases, we had to send 448 students home and an additional 44 staff members. So it's a lot of people that are impacted just in the last 11 days by those COVID cases. I will say that we have moved some classes online already. That's at St. Augustine. And I think I made you aware of that. So that's a bit of a challenge. And it was primarily, again, for that reason, due to staffing. We have 3 additional schools that are just right on the cusp of functioning. If there's any more cases, we may need to move parts of their schools online. That's Father Lacombe, Mother Duville, and Holy Trinity Academy. Those 3 schools, depending on what happens in the next few days to a week, will determine whether those schools can stay in person or whether parts of that will have to go online. So the other big item that's taking a lot of time right now is curriculum. And that is a standing item, and it is on the agenda, so I'll speak to that a little later on. But are there any questions with my report or any of the items that I've highlighted?
Trustee Afan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Bouchard, for bringing this. And that exactly, that was, like you said, there was some emails circulating. Yeah, it's just scary, and I know Ponoka was becoming a very hot spot. With everything you've been sending us, as well as myself maneuvering around around the community there. I do know it was so. Well done, and thank you for that. Quick question though, with the 4 guidelines from the government, do you have to meet all 4 or just 1 or 2 of those criteria, and then you should be able to move online? If you can clarify that for me.
Sure, thank you for that question. So first off, there's 3 possible decisions that need to be made. The first is moving certain classes online. We do not need any permission or to meet any criteria on that. We can make that decision on our own. So we don't have to consult with Alberta Ed in those situations. Now, to move a school online, that is part of those criteria can be met to move a school online. So for example, if one criteria is substitute teacher availability, we can move a school online just for that alone. That is something that we do have to consult with Alberta Ed on, and they're usually quite willing to meet us where we're at. Where the 4 criteria come in, and they all have to be met, is if you want to move the entire division online.
Okay.
So those kind of situations, so as you move more online, the criteria gets more stringent.
Okay.
And I guess what I will say, I don't know that I would see us moving in that respect.
Okay.
For example, elementary grades are a lot easier to deal with because one cohort has to go home. The teacher usually goes home with them. That's a lot easier to manage. Junior, senior high, one class or one case can impact many, many classes, and that, or teachers. So that is, that's the challenge with the 7 to 12. And that is why you're seeing, you know, your Fort McMurray, Grand Prairie, Edmonton and Calgary move online with those demographics. It's just not enough staff for those grades.
Those are our teenagers and the youth that want to do their own thing. Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else with some questions or comments?
I was just going to say, isn't Mother DeVille already over 50% online?
They are, but the thing is, they're not online because we've moved them online. They're online because they're in isolation.
Okay,
So it's just a subtle difference.
okay, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Charlie, I was wondering, could the Catholic teaching on discrimination, could that be shared with trustees?
Yeah, we can have that shared with trustees.
Yeah, I just think it would be good, you know, good to review for ourselves, that piece on Catholic social teaching. And then the meeting with the deputy minister on curriculum, well, you are going to go to that. So when we get to 7.8, you can talk about that. But I was just wondering if it gave, if there's any insight on that meeting. And then the Vitra protocol video. So I noticed it's like 50 minutes. Is that a training video that could be shared or not?
Yeah, those are things that we can share, definitely.
I was just thinking because of, you know, we just went through such a difficult situation, and for trustees to be familiar with that whole process, you know, might be helpful, and to understand what our staff went through, right? Just wondering if trustees would be interested in that. Just maybe give me a thumbs up.
I would be.
Thumbs up, okay. And trustee Spidich? Okay, just for a resource. And then I just wanted to say thank you for the First Nations teaching sessions. I went to a couple of them and they were excellent. So I really appreciated those.
Could I also mention that Chris has done a great job, and she's actually done 2 where it's just been her and I, and she stayed
Yeah.
on
Yeah,
one, which was great.
yeah. And then the collaborative partnership with Leduc, Parkland, and Evergreen on sharing specialized resources. Is that just particular to that area? because we did kind of have that request at our sister board meeting with Wetaskiwin.
Which bullet are you talking about, Madam Chair?
Sorry, I didn't mark it down. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so those are just informal partnerships that, the Director of Student Services, they'll have set up.
Yeah.
Informally, and some of them are more formal. Yeah.
Yeah. Just wondering about, I was just thinking about that sister board meeting with Wetaskiwin and, how that works and if it's an opportunity.
A lot
with
of these are almost leftovers, and you can see they're holdovers from the RCSD.
Yeah.
So they've kept those same structures in place, kind of just as we transition to our new model.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then the last question I have is for everybody, I guess, on, how do we respond to the people that, helped with that situation at Christ the King? Do we send a thank you letter to Victim Services, the RCMP, STARS, like those trauma response people that really, they do this every day, but how do we say thank you, or how do we do that? So I'm just asking the board for their thoughts on that. I know Victim Services, I don't know if they're still in the school, but they spent a lot of days there.
They were only there for that week, the first week.
The first week, okay.
Yeah. I don't have any issue with us formally recognizing some of those partners. I am worried though that we're going to miss somebody. There's so many people, and that's my only fear. I don't even have a solid handle on every last person that was in.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about the immediate responders there. Just to start, Trustee Epon?
Madam Chair, how about a very good generic response, social media, in discussion with our communication, and just to send it out there, that we are not mentioning and being specific, so then we don't miss anybody before we start getting some angry phone calls, right? Because it was a community as well as division.
Well, I think we did. I think there was a statement that was put out, and Caitlin can correct me.
Yeah, we did that, but again, it's just now that we're wrapping things again, it's been 2 weeks already, right? We're wrapping things up after the 30th, right? Something again, just to send out and then to direct people as to some of the suggestions that may come out with discussion with Kevin Cameron. And then, it's in that phase of, continuing, because this is going to take, everybody heals differently, and it's going to take some time. But then again, if we do this for the second time, then now that the weather is getting better and some people are getting to be a little bit intuitive with whatever is happening or what has happened, then it's just doing our due diligence again to support community and the division. Yeah. There are no wrong or right answers here. But
so maybe sorry, go ahead, Trustee Tugwood.
Just wondering if this could be part of the trustee article that goes into the papers once a month. Mention that.
Yeah, so the April one is already done. I'm just thinking of my own community and the timeliness, and the personal, personally reaching out to those first responders, I guess. So maybe this is something that Caitlin and myself and Charlie could just talk about and decide if we should send something or not. Or would Caitlin have any recommendations?
Any thoughts, Caitlin?
I don't really have any recommendations. We did do, when we released our statement on the incident, we had a very generic thank you to everyone who offered support in the social media posts. I think in our letters to families, we also mentioned thank you for the support as well. Yeah, I don't know. I just wonder if it's kind of late at this point, but obviously whatever the will of the board is.
Yeah.
That's almost my feeling. Like, for example, I met with the RCMP today, this morning, to do a bit of a debrief. You know, so I expressed my thanks for them for being, they were there in 3 minutes. You know, and I expressed that thanks. Part of my fear with putting out, you know, a round of communications is going to ignite the media to come after us again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a real, it will get a flood, and that's always a challenge for Caitlin and myself to deal with. So we're almost at 40 days after the event.
Yeah, no, I was, like I said, I was just thinking about if we needed to personally reach out to those first responders. Something that, and I mean, I was just thinking about it at a personal level, you know, if it was a family situation, that's probably what I would do, to personally say thank you. But so I was just thinking about my community, how to do that to those responders. So, but if I get the opportunity to, then I guess I will, in a personal way, and we can leave it at that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think that's all that I had. Thank you for the report and all the work from yourself and all the staff, Charlie.
You're welcome.
Okay, 7.3.
I'm going to just kind of hit just briefly the highlights, because it's mainly focused on two areas. One is, again, supporting the superintendent and Christ the King School since the event, with various activities and participation in that regard over the last month. And then a lot of activities surrounding budget, of course, within the division, as well as once we received our funding profile. And I'll be talking about what that means for 2021 kind of in the next agenda item. The other thing too, just for trustees' awareness with regards to your capital plan, I had a meeting with the city of Beaumont with regards to site availability again, and the ability for them to issue a letter of commitment to a school site. There's been some discussion that possibly the Lakeview subdivision to the southeast, which has in its area structure plan a site for 2 schools. There is some reconfiguration possibly happening with regards to that area structure plan, but at this point, it's looking, again, they've said this before, it's the one subdivision that might be closest to being ready. And the city of Beaumont, the official I was talking to, indicated that they were definitely interested in issuing us a letter of commitment for a site and to further our capital project along. That was a couple of weeks ago. I have to do some follow-up because I haven't received the letter yet. But certainly I was very optimistic to hear that was a kind of a positive perspective on moving our capital requests forward and having the city of Beaumont kind of express some support very formally in terms of that letter. So that appears to be moving forward. And again, there might be some, haven't touched base with them yet to see if there's any other information that we can have that they need from us to help support in getting that letter attached to our capital request for a new high school in Beaumont. So those were the 3 highlights that I wanted to mention out of my report.
Yeah, that's excellent to hear that the city of Beaumont is willing to go to the next step. That's good news. Yeah, excellent. And that's all that I had for questions for me. Does anybody else have any questions? Any other trustees for Ed's report? Trustee Serwa?
I was just going to say what you said. That sounds really good news. And I guess to follow up to make sure the letter does come is, like you say, you're going to do that. So
yeah,
good work, Ed.
Well, I appreciate the openness from the city of Beaumont and the receptiveness to that. So I think they've established some precedent in issuing those commitment letters already. So hopefully it's a smooth process from this point forward.
Okay, thank you. And then 7.4.
Ed, the talking head continues.
Yes.
Budget 21-22, how exciting. So I've got a few documents there just because I'm not sure how widely circulated information was to the board and trustees. So I've got 3 documents and then a presentation based for next year. So trustees are brought up to speed on how our budget development process has been proceeding internally with the division. So the first document I've got up on the screen is the comparison between last year's funding profile and the funding profile, or this current year's funding profile and the funding profile for next year, so 21-22. And I've highlighted for us, as indicated in the minister's letter and certainly communication from administration of the department staff, was their concept of hold harmless because of our enrollments with COVID, was that we would receive no less in funding than what we did for this current year under that profile. So that's how we stacked up. And the chart is intended to show whether you got more or you got the same for going into next year. My quick count said that there was 11 boards who actually received more money. So that means their enrollments were higher than what they had projected. But for the majority of us, we're being held harmless by receiving at least the same amount of money from between this year and next year. So that is a public document that was available on the provincial website. So I want trustees to be aware of it in case somebody brings it up in terms of questions. The next one that I've got is our actual funding profile. Again, last year, I think this was sent out individually to board chairs as well as to the superintendent and secretary treasurers. This year was basically indicated to be a download document. So again, I want trustees to be aware of how our funding for next year broke down. The 2 things at this point I want to highlight is actually at the bottom of this page. So the first one is that 2021 funding adjustment. And in the fall, we had done a projection administratively that said we might be looking at a $1.2 million clawback because our enrollment was so far below our projected enrollment for this year. So the province, what they've done is they've indicated, yes, this would be your clawback. So they're trying to keep their messaging the same in terms of what that, if we overproject our enrollments, here's what the impact's going to be. This is how it flows through, is that our funding will be impacted the following year. So we make those adjustments either early in the year that we know that figure, or we start making adjustments in the following year when our actual funding is going to be affected. But because of COVID, and again, the messaging from the minister in terms of hold harmless was that they were not going to do that, what I call a clawback. It's referred to here as a funding adjustment. We'll agree to disagree and move on. But that's what they've done. So they're showing the offset. So our funding is actually being bumped up so that funding adjustment for our enrollment estimate is not impacting our funding. The last one is the bridge funding. And when this was introduced as part of the funding framework last spring, the bridge funding was the pot of money they had over the next 3 years to fund student growth year on year. And this bridge funding would eventually be eliminated by the last year. I think because of our circumstances, this was used to mitigate any reductions in funding because of our weighted moving average. When the budget was announced, there was correspondence sent out by the minister that it indicated that the weighted moving average for next year would be calculated, use the higher of our projection or enrollment. That wasn't the case. What has rolled out in terms of our funding profile, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in my presentation, was that our funding profile for this year reflects our actual enrollments for this year. So for 2021, lower enrollment is being used as our actual enrollment moving through that weighted moving average. So this adjustment of 800,000 to bring us up to 41 million, 0.4, is an assumption that this is what keeps us hold harmless, but we're still going to feel the impact of this lower enrollment for this year for the next 2 years.
Mhm.
And so what will be interesting is how that plays out over time, because of it's significantly less than what we've had traditionally in terms of what our enrollments have been. But those are the areas out of this that I wanted everybody to be aware of in terms of how it looked in terms of our funding for 21-22. And then the third attachment I have kind of shows the variance and what the changes were in funding based on that adjustment to our weighted moving average and having this 1 year significantly less and how it impacts us moving forward. So the very first column, budget 21-22, is what we're being allocated for next year at this point. Budget 2020 was what we were allocated. And then the third column is whether it's more or less than what we had in 2020. So I'll kind of scroll through this and talk about a few of the items here. Again, our enrollments, because they're so significantly less for this year, has an impact in terms of that rolling through our weighted moving average. So our ECS and our grades 1 to 9 were the most significantly impacted with lower enrollment, so we get less. Our projection, however, on the high school level is higher again. And so we're actually anticipating that we're going to get more money based on our high school population. Or that's, the province is indicating that. A couple of key things with regards to special needs students is the province has now indicated that they're putting money towards moderate language delay. And they're actually creating a student identification code that they will use to calculate the amount of funding based on the number of students that are identified with moderate language delay. And that added $108,000 to the division's grant calculation. The other thing they did is that they've separated out the severe kindergarten. The current funding model only recognizes pre-K students under program unit funding. The kindergarten to grade 12 was included in this line called specialized learning supports for the current year. That's why there's only this one figure of $3.7 million. For next year, they've separated out the kindergarten, and they're going to use the same funding model as they do for the pre-K. So this is how the province has said they've now are funding PUF, is they've separated a calculation out from the SLS. But of course, if you look, our SLS has gone down by 354. The kindergarten PUF has gone up to, has added 457. So there's a net increase of about $100,000. And then we get to the other thing that was in the minister's statement, was the utilization of $40 million from operations and maintenance to adjust special needs. And for our jurisdiction, that means that area is being reduced by almost $230,000. So I think and in comment when reviewing this with the finance committee, I think there was a phrase used, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So yes, we get more money for SLS, less money in operations and grant calculations. From my perspective, because the whole model is based on flexibility for the board, it now places the emphasis on the board, the trustee, and the division on how we allocate those resources, even more so than it did previously. So those were the key differences that I want to highlight from the funding model. So what you can see is that the new funding model, or the funding for 21-22, would have been about $259,000 less. But because of the bridge funding, it brought us up to an equivalent amount. I'm going to move over to the last two columns. And the reason I'm bringing these up is that when we set allocations for schools, we had to use a basis, some basis. And so based on the letter from the minister, we went and recalculated our revenues based on a hold harmless based on enrollments. So there's higher differences in some areas. There's some areas we knew we were going to get additional funding, or there was going to be additional calculations in special needs for PUF, and the moderate language delay was not anticipated in terms of any communication I'd had up to that point. The net result after all was said and done was my revenue calculations were short by about a total of $112,000. So when we've looked at our allocations for our schools, we had some buffer built in, and so we didn't have to impact any of our school allocations at the end of the year. The other thing that I also referenced, if you haven't paid attention, our funding for next year has been held harmless. So we're still getting $41.4 million next year. But that means up at the top, where they added 108 and another $100,000 into PUF, there's no new money for us.
No.
The total is the same. And so we're essentially using those funds to support our current allocation model. Now for our ECS, we had included them under our tier 3 allocations. And under that model, we allocate to our schools more money than we would under this methodology. And for our moderates, we're already providing speech language pathologists and supports through that way. So we are already putting expenditures in these areas, seeing them as a priority. So this sheet is kind of just to show you what the differences have been, not only with our actual funding, but when I was doing projections for our funding for next year, where I had differences based on that weighted moving average. So then I'll just kind of walk through a bit of the presentation. The slides are all there, but again, it's usually easier if people see what Ed's looking at as he's talking. So you should see the title slide, 21-22 budget.
Yeah.
I'm seeing nodding of heads, great. So again, talk a bit about enrollments, what our funding profile looks like, changes that we've made to school allocations just for your own awareness administratively, and what our standard costs look like for next year, because those are significant factors. Most of our budget is in staffing. So our enrollment projections for 21-22 put us at about 4,300 students. That's fairly close to what we had projected for 2021. But COVID caused a huge dip from our projection to our actuals for 2021. And 2021 was actually less than what our actuals were for the previous year. And that little orange stripe that's represented there is our federally funded student population. They also contribute to our resources that we have available. The one thing that we have as an assumption administratively, we had to tell our administrators this, is that we assumed that we would return to 100% in-person instruction next year. But that's an evolving context. We're seeing what's happening with our COVID rates, and currently, we're also having the vaccination rollouts happening concurrently. So we know that context will change, but at the time that we were asking for enrollment estimates, we had to say something. We said, let's assume we're back to in-person. With regards to our funding profile, as I talked about, the hold harmless. Again, what came across was 21-22. We did not receive less funding than what we received for 2021. And we were getting no adjustment for our actual enrollments to 2021. But again, previously, what had been indicated was that it might be the difference between our projected enrollment and actual. And no, strictly our actuals were used in the funding profile first. So I'll kind of give you kind of a demonstrate what that means is in terms of what our weighted moving average. So our 2021 profile came up with a weighted moving average of just under 4,200 students with a projection for this current year of 4,286 students. When I was doing my original estimate, based on the minister's letter, I was looking at our current year would use the lesser of, or the greater of, either our actual enrollments or our projected enrollments. Well, if we use the projected enrollments because it was greater than our actual, we would come up with a weighted moving average of about 4,200 students. What the province did was said, no, we're using your actual enrollments and doing it hold harmless in terms of total funding, so you don't receive less. Well, that gives us about 95 students less in our weighted moving average. And then for 22-23, this 3,975 will still follow us for that year into that prior year. So again, the whole concept of our actual enrollments as they move forward will have a negative impact, and it will be interesting to see how the province responds to that moving forward. With regards to our funding profile, funding is not less than current year. Separation of the ECS PUF from the 1 to 12 student learning supports, the addition of funding for mild moderate language delay. And I guess I can't reiterate this enough. It's included as the not less, so there's no new money. And I think that will be a challenge for our school communities to understand, was that we had to pick some priorities. But what was positive is that we had already established those priorities last year in our allocations to schools. So we had already seen that, you know, it was critical that we tried to maintain our supports as consistently through for students as they move through the grade levels. The big ouch is operations and maintenance. What they did in terms of our funding is they actually reduced the rates. It's not highlighted anywhere in the funding manual that they reduced the rates. It's strictly on the calculation tabs. My colleagues in ASBOA have certainly highlighted this to the province, that out of your key messages for the grant funding manual, that might have been an important thing to highlight for school jurisdictions.
Yes, exactly.
The other thing that came out on the funding profile is now the change to IMR and what CMR has evolved into. CMR was a program that was announced last spring to stimulate the economy a bit and accelerate all of our small capital projects that we normally fund through IMR. So what that has now morphed into, and it's always been a part, IMR funding had always had two components, and it was a capital funding component and an operating funding component. But they never expressly expressed that to school jurisdictions until about 3 years ago. And then what they were realizing is that the provincial budget showed capital expenditures, but when they rolled up, they were all operational because of the way jurisdictions were spending the money. So then came in, we had to spend 30% on capital. CMR came in, and now it's been re-envisioned. And so in terms of the documentation that was also submitted, this is the summary chart. So for this current year, we have IMR, CMR money, which was what I call the old IMR. So about $1.1 million. But we also received $1.7 million in CMR money.
So, sorry, I'll just ask. So when did we receive that?
The 1.7?
Yeah.
We would have received that last May.
Oh, right.
Remember,
okay.
yeah, we did those
Yeah.
roofing and all
And
of
we
those.
did, yeah.
those
And we,
projects,
so
yeah.
that's That's done already, yeah.
That's all done. It's all spent.
Yeah.
We submitted final cost claims back in October, and actually, there was an inquiry made whether there was any IMR expenditures that we hadn't claimed that we could fully claim the $1.7 million. We identified a project that we could claim an additional $72,000 of CMR funding. So we actually maximized the amount of funding on a review requested by Alberta Education. So for next year, we have now the IMR and CMR. But when you look at that split, the CMR, we will now have to spend $52,000 on capital-orientated projects, no longer 30%. The CMR, we have to submit projects for approval to see that they're eligible. And this year we had about 2 weeks to submit a list of projects that would be CMR style projects. The inquiries made, like, are we going to have more timelines? And I haven't seen anything. The last I heard was they were hoping to have something out by the end of this month, but I'm not optimistic at this point. The one thing is that there is latitude in that CMR to change priorities, add projects as emergent. So there is some flexibility, but the big thing is that they have to be capital in nature. And what hurts us then is any of our small kind of repairs that we claim under IMR previously. Now we've only got about $500,000 to claim those smaller repairs under. So facilities is coming back and looking at their IMR listing, looking at what we submitted for CMR, and prioritizing the projects between those two areas. And moving forward, we're probably going to have to submit CMR projects on an annual basis. There has been, it's been mentioned in my meeting certainly that Treasury is looking at actually approving those projects, and then you cannot spend outside of those approved projects. Right now, there's still some flexibility. Are there any questions with regards to funding for next year? Okay. School allocation changes. We've made no changes in base allocation rates. The one thing that we had to do is, as we were rolling through the changes in enrollments, we had schools that were having kind of minor declines or minor increases, but their allocations were swinging by substantial sums. We had an increase of 40 students meant the school was getting $200,000 more. We had a decrease of 20 students and the school was receiving $100,000 less. And it didn't look equitable in terms of those swings. So what we did was we put a moderating factor in. And so any change in enrollment, we only included 50% in the allocation model. And it allowed for more money for schools that had more students, but the schools that had less didn't see such a strong decline. And in some respects, there was a certain elegance to it in my mind, because it reflected that 50% on our projected enrollments that the province uses for a weighted moving average. So we tried to make sure, and we're hoping on a go-forward basis that this becomes the base for our allocation model, that we've now kind of set it, that we won't have to change it regardless of how the funding flows from the province. And again, as previously mentioned, we put the religious education coordination in for all schools at a 0.1 FTE. So that's been anticipated. The other thing that we've added to the allocations is the utilization of anticipated surplus. We are expecting that we are going to have unspent funds in our pool for substitute teachers. Our estimate at the time was in excess of $150,000. In discussion with the superintendent, we said we could safely reinvest $150,000. So when we come with a budget to the board, we'll be asking for a request of use of surplus funds of $150,000 to put towards school allocations based on the surplus from the substitute pool. We also have a contingency fund for staffing, and we haven't fully accessed that this year. And again, conservatively, we've said, let's look for $150,000 to reinvest and redistribute back to schools that they can count on. So again, we anticipate that'll be surplus funds coming out of this year. And so when this budget is is presented to the board, we'll be requesting for $150,000 of surplus funds to support that. And the last item, and it only affects one school, basically Father Lacombe, is that we see, and we've seen it in our past capital projects, the need for additional administrative support. Now, whether that's additional time to free up the vice principal or the principal from their regular duties, whether it might be in terms of the admin assistant support, but we'll be looking for the board to support $50,000 of unrestricted surplus to allocate to Father Lacombe to utilize in their administration area to support the additional work while they move through the construction process. And we've done that in the past as well. So those are the big changes in terms of allocations to schools. Looking at standard costs, one standard cost for teachers, we are seeing an increase. We're looking at about $1,300. The majority of that impact is actually from our benefit costs. Our premiums for extended healthcare benefits from ASABP are going up about 7%.
I just have a comment about that. So that surprised me. Like, is that just because of this year, or what's the increase in previous years? 7% seems high.
7% is high. What's been outlined in the documentation from ASABP is that they've always been mitigating the increases or softening the blow from the surplus funds that they have available and investment income that those funds are earning. So they've almost been subsidizing premiums across all the boards. Now that the returns on investment are less and their surpluses have been drawn down over time, they can't subsidize as much as they have in the past. And so we're seeing more of the market increase than what we have in the past.
Now, were you anticipating that?
No.
Like last year? So this is an unknown increase.
Yeah, it's the nice thing about I must admit, I'm rather forgiving. ASABP tried to advise school boards as early as possible of what the possible rates we're looking at. And so when we were doing our standard costs, we were already looking at this 7% increase. And so anticipating not anticipating of how it would impact schools doing their budgets, but how it will affect our standard cost.
Okay, thank you.
Ed, there's also that grid creeping, isn't there, that it plays into this increase too?
Yeah. There's a little bit of we use the phrase grid creep, and what that is the number of staff that are not at maximum on the grid that are increasing because of years of experience. So generally speaking, the change year on year for staff is about $3,000. We have about 50% of our staff that are not at maximum. So we have a little component to the increase. I call it little. It's about $500 per staff member that's attributed to the just moving up on the grid of our existing staff. $800 is attributed strictly to benefit cost increases. Any other questions or comments?
And how long does it usually take a teacher to go from the minimum to the maximum? Is it like 10 years, 15 years?
It's a 10-step grid, so it'll take 10 years. If there's been no attribution for higher on the grid based on past experience.
No, Ed, just a comment, and to my fellow trustees, Ed, thank you very much for the excellent presentation again. So something that we as trustees will be mindful of is when we're looking at our priorities, there hasn't been any increase in money, as we know, or as we've seen. And I know with our different communities, and the rhetoric is we get more money. When it comes to allocating money, we should be mindful to make sure that our priorities and the guidelines we have inform some of these decisions to make sure that we are supporting the needs and not spending or wanting to go above and beyond when we don't have the money. Yeah, so just a caution comment to fellow trustees. Thank you, Ed.
Any other questions on standard cost of teachers? For educational assistants, standard cost, here we're seeing a greater change, and the majority of this are equally split between the grid increments. Again, we have a greater percentage of staff that are actually moving up in terms of years of experience with division, as opposed to ones that are capped, especially in the educational assistants. We also are absorbing the 7% increase in our extended healthcare benefits here. So it's a fair increase year on year, relatively speaking. With regards to administrative assistants, it's a lower change in average cost because most of the staff here in this group are at maximum. The other thing that we have as a bit of a mitigating factor, and it also happens with the EAs, is that benefit costs are shared with staff. And that's 10% of the costs are still supported by the staff themselves. 90% is supported by the board in terms of our benefits. So there's a little bit of mitigation and not as much of an increase with our administrative assistant standard cost. And the last one is the standard cost for custodians. Again, here we've got a situation where majority of staff are at maximum in terms of their step, and we've got a cost share with our benefits. The one thing to keep in mind, because these salaries look so much higher compared to admin assistants or to EAs, is that these are 12-month employees.
Mm-hmm.
We're generally speaking, the admin assistants are paid over 12, but their actual work time and associated time is, for the most part, about 10 months. But for custodians, they are 12 months year round. And then just for the board's information, as we kind of transition over to the assurance model, this is what I've done as a summary in retrospect. And again, this is more focused on central allocations because the schools are still in the process of developing their budgets, and components of their budgets will feed up into the assurance model domains. So looking at those domains with regards to growth and affirming a Catholic identity, right now we have about central allocations of $438,000 to support in resources being to support those ends. In terms of student growth and achievement, there's allocations of about $760,000 in resources. With regards to teaching and leading, we've got $200,000 kind of allocated, but I think it's a bit misleading. And the misleading component is that a lot of times with PD, the big cost is the cost of replacing staff when they're out on PD, or those days when we have strictly staff-only days. So I think we'll take a look and see how we can better maybe represent how our teaching and leading is represented within that domain for the assurance model. Oops. Learning supports. This is big. Mm-hmm. Come back. $4.2 million is what we have in allocations and expenditures related to supporting students with needs. With the governance component, a lot of that is embedded in individual or the board's budget itself. So until the board has had a chance to kind of review their budget, and that will be at the finance meeting, finance committee will be reviewing their next meeting. I haven't put a figure yet in for that. So this is how I'm interpreting the requirements for the assurance model and demonstrating to the board what resources are being put towards those ends specifically.
Thank you.
Trustee Afon, did you have a question?
No, just saying thank you, Mr. Latka.
Yeah, that was excellent. I really appreciate this last slide too. Just identifying the funds put towards that goal. So thank you very much.
There's some refinement, and I've put it on my agenda to work with the senior administration to look at some of the other areas to make sure I've got an alignment with budget and the strategies are there. And so I'll do a review with them to make sure that we've got an alignment with what's intended.
Okay, Trustee Tugwood, did you have a comment? No?
I said that's excellent. Thank you very much for the presentation, Ed.
Anyone else with a comment or question?
I'll just say the
Trustee
same
Smith?
thing, same thing I said at the finance meeting. Very well put together, Ed. Appreciate the layout. Thank you.
Read.
I think it will be interesting to see how the weighted moving average does affect us in not the next year, but the following year. So that still carries forward. So we have to be aware of that. But I have heard about advocacy in that area already. So I'm not sure what that looks like, but I know ASBA is aware of that, and it all depends on how we do going forward for this year, like how things
Well,
look. Yeah.
I think because the province had already identified they had a pool of funds that they had in that 3-year budget, that was the bridging funding to support growth. Certainly, all the information that's coming out right now is that the province as a whole, in terms of number of students, did not grow.
Yeah.
It actually receded.
Yeah.
So I think my impression is that there should be some money to help support and mitigate that enrollment, but I don't know what that'll look like or how that'll roll out.
Yeah. It's still something to be considered and recognized and dealt with. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing to consider, and I'll highlight this as well, is when we come into our third quarter financial report, is because we've had a lot of infusion of dollars, is that we are anticipating surpluses being carried forward. So again, how will the province interpret that and expect boards to respond to unspent funds at the end of this year, because so much support has gone into supporting schools and education in terms of the federal money, more so.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? That was an excellent presentation. Thank you, Ed. So we will take a break. It's 2:33 right now. So if we come back at 2:45, just over 10 minutes. Okay, and then we should be able to finish up. Okay,